And we're back to another episode here of Veteran Nation. This episode is recorded, and we'll be putting it out there a couple days after we've done it. And a lot of it is because we have a very important guest. Joining us today is Ron Coleman. Ron Coleman is a lawyer with the Dillon Law Group. He's very prominent on Twitter. He's worked for for President Trump. He's worked for a lot of other high-profile clients. So sit back and enjoy this recorded interview here on Veteran Nation. Okay, and right now joining us, we have who's joined us before, friend of the show, Don Winger, who is a veteran and military retiree. And our special guest today, we have Ron Coleman. Ron, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, we're doing well here. Thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a very interesting discussion because we like to deal with a lot of legal things here at Veteran Nation. We're very big on obviously military stuff, veteran stuff, and because we're military and veterans, we get into a lot of gun stuff as well. So if there's anything that we start talking about that you're like, hey, I don't really know too much about that, please let me know. We can move right on to the next thing. But there's actually a lot of legal stuff going on in the world right now.
As long as your listeners, I was saying, Skipper, as long as your listeners understand why you would want to have on a guy who would possibly be asking questions like that, just because he's a lawyer. Lawyers are a dime a dozen in this country. But fine, it works for you. I'm here.
And that's actually kind of why I wanted you on, because I follow you on Twitter. I've seen other things that you've done.
And you had 11 other lawyers.
Well, actually, you don't give lawyer answers. You're not always like, well, it depends. You're very well. You give very sound legal opinions. You have very good opinions, interesting opinions, and that's why I wanted you on here today. Because those lawyer answers, they're fine. I get it. I get everything depends, but we also, at some point, we got to come to an answer. We got to get some of the meat on the bones. So I think that's, for people that follow you, I think that's why they enjoy.
Let's jump into it. I'm here for the ride. You asked me to come along. Skipper says hop on. I hop on.
Well, this first one is it's a gun case, and I think you're really going to have a unique opinion because it's out of your home state, New York. A group of Orthodox Jews in New York City, they're suing about this new law in New York because it put all these special places that you can't concealed carry nearby, even though the Supreme Court just said you can. And they're objecting to it because the state is saying that you can't concealed carry in a synagogue, and they're saying that actually should be our decision.
Well, look, they couldn't have been more obvious about the fact that they were trying to do a workaround. I mean, it's so over the top stupid, this legislation. But what Democrats do now in red states and red cities is they enact regulations, and they pass bills solely for the political effect in order to just as red meat for their base. And they almost always understand that they're going to be thrown out sooner or later, but they're doing two things, right? They're exercising power while they can and reminding people that the Constitution is not in charge, they're in charge. And they're also just reassuring their base that even though we do live in a constitutional republic, and even though from time to time a court will step in and do the right thing, that they are absolutely committed to their subversive program. So the United States Supreme Court, after years, decades of ignoring critical Second Amendment questions, such as, does an individual have a right to a gun, which would seem like the most obvious fundamental question that should not even have to be asked, much less answered, came out, as you know, and said, yeah, you can't say, New York, which was the original statute, that the only place rather that you can have your Second Amendment rights is in your own house. Mm-hmm. That's not what the Constitution meant. It certainly isn't what it says. So New York comes along and says, okay, I don't even know what we were thinking. It doesn't have to only be in your house. It can be anywhere except the following places: outdoors, in the park, on the subway, in a church, in a store, in a box with a fox. I
And
mean, obviously that's. I mean, the judges, first judge they hit has already trimmed it back.
And for I don't know, Don, feel free to interject, but these feel very personal. These laws, because I'm in California, so we get the same type of laws here. But they always say, "Oh yeah, we want to support the veterans. Only people with military training should have these weapons." But then when it comes down to it, we're one of the first groups that they deny. In fact, we have a young man he was on our show this week. He's coming back next week to tell the second half of the story. He was denied access to get a gun because he voluntarily put himself into a hospital while he was in the military because he was struggling with depression and suicide. And that affects a lot of veterans. So we're the first group that they come after. Don?
Yeah, and I saw that. I told you I watched that last night, and I saw, and I'm in with another veterans group for disabled vets that some of the same things are happening with regard to that. People say, I hate to be, hate to sound like like a Debbie Downer, but it's like people say, oh yeah, we support our veterans. Until July 5th when they're sobering up, cleaning up their backyard, and then they roll up their stars and stripes until June 30th. And, I think it's all lip service. I mean, I think there are legitimately people that support the veterans, but I think there are a lot of people that say they do, but they really don't.
We have, look, this
Just
whole
my
issue
opinion.
of background checks essentially are we understand the logic and the reasoning behind background checks, just as we understand the logic and the reasoning behind red flag laws. We also see how easy it is to abuse them, because either you're going to be hiding information. I mean, everyone who's ever, lived on this planet and done anything or done any kind of self-care. I mean, I got to tell you guys, okay, I'm talking to you. Behind me is the skyline of Newark on a across out the other window is New York City. Everyone within sound of my voice, well, this is actually recorded on the internet, so I guess that's the entire world, but except maybe not in North Korea and Cuba, but everyone in the zip code where I'm sitting, and the zip code that I can see out the window, everyone here has been to a psychiatrist for some reason or another. Okay, so what do? You deny that you went, that you took care of yourself, that you had a problem, or do you acknowledge that you did and then get dinged? And of course, if you deny it and you did do it, and of course, veterans are subject to a tremendous amount of stress, especially those, obviously, especially combat veterans and people in high pressure posts. You're gonna, it makes. What would you prefer? Should a guy be Johnny Rambo instead and never go to a shrink and just, blow his top, when some kind of stress comes along? It's insane, because my point about the red flag laws is that all you're doing when all these laws do, and again, we can understand the logic of them, but when you have a background check and say, once I have the background check, I'll land on any square that you've filled in on that background check as a basis to deny you a weapon. What the hell is that? That's preposterous. It's what we call in the law a form of arbitrary and capricious conduct, which in administrative law means you didn't do it for a good reason. You did it because you have the power to do it. On the other hand, right? And you want to hear, Don, what you have to say about this. If a guy does check off that box, and then a year later, 6 months later, 6 years later, he does shoot up a post office, we all know what they're going to say, right? It said right here that he had mental health problems. There's an easy answer to that. I want to hear if you got it.
I think the Supreme Court has actually made it quite clear that the only people who can really deny anyone a right from the Constitution should only be judges. If there's going to be a red flag law, it should only be for like 72 hours or 96 hours to allow that person their due process to get in front of a judge. That would be the only way I can see it for it to be legal.
What are the criteria for these red flags? Who makes that determination? I mean, is there some sort of spectrum where they determine, on what point in this
Right.
imaginary spectrum do you determine if somebody should be flagged?
Is there a point system? Are we going to second guess the point system? I mean, it's really it's problematic no matter what you do.
Mhm.
What people are worried about is liability, because there's really, ironically, there's virtually no accountability for anything that anyone does in government anymore. We see the utter lack of consequences for decisions that are made by people in government, no matter how many people are harmed. So the idea that, well, we don't want to get criticized, we don't want to have somebody, second guess us for giving a guy a permit, or giving a guy, I live in New Jersey, how many hoops I have to go through just to get permission to buy a handgun? Just not a gun, forget handgun, just for permission to buy I need a permit to purchase one. Forget about training, carrying, anything like that. So anyway, once you're in this situation where you need to, where you're giving all this power over to all these bureaucracies,
Mhm.
like it's just like you say, Skipper, it's inevitable, but that's the decision that was made. I guess to some extent we can say, well, that was what the framers chose.
Mhm.
That was the kind of world we were going to live in. As you said, that's essentially the direction the Supreme Court is mostly going in. Therefore, if you don't like that, then let's talk about amending the Constitution, not doing what the New York State Legislature did, which was just doing a workaround.
We'll just ignore it. And a federal judge did strike that law down, but the state quickly appealed. It's going to the Second Circuit Court. They put a stay on the decision. So right now that law is in effect. I don't know. I think it might have a very short shelf life right now.
It will, man. There are a couple of things. One is that you do have the, just on the sort of one-dimensional, the court said thou shalt not, and essentially you said, okay, we're not. We just are. Okay, so obviously that's a problem. And the Second Circuit, they're not dummies. And not only that, they haven't, especially in the last few years compared to 15, 20 years ago, they haven't been terrible on guns, Second Circuit. There are worse. There were circuits. Let's put it that way. Ninth is always worse. You can always go. Then there's the second aspect of it, which is that they were, as I said, going to my original comments about the political aspect of this, they were loud and proud about what they were doing and why. And that's a really foolish thing to do. Judges pay attention to that. And basically, the Supreme Court told us during when the immigration laws were challenged under Trump, and the Supreme Court considered it to be legitimate to go to campaign statements to find out what was really intended in issuing an executive order, which I was astonished. But they made it seem like it was the most obvious thing in the world that's cool. Well, when legislators say, well, we're going to undo that, we're just going to make it impossible. Mm-hmm. And then specifically the issue of synagogues, by the way, synagogues, churches, houses of worship. That's crazy. Synagogues and churches have become, unfortunately, next to schools, like the main targets of lunatics with guns. Mm-hmm. That's where you want people who are going to be in a position to take care of self-defense. You can't have armed guards all the time, everywhere. And they also have to, part of the idea of concealed carry, as is that it is you don't know who in that room is carrying.
Exactly.
And if you say, listen, I guarantee you that if you take out that guy in the Tyvek vest out front, you're good to go once you get inside. You know what's going to happen.
You've actually hit on a lot of big points about how the court's changing, the type of things that they're going on. And I want to go to Don on this because, it's not just on this issue that veterans are running into issues. Don, you've been with a group who is fighting on judges, especially at the state level, who are ignoring federal law as it applies to military and veterans. And you've talked about it on the show. Will you go into it just a little bit?
Yeah, but I want to go back to something you touched on, or something Ron touched on is regarding the red flag laws, I've had a security clearance since I was 18 years old. Okay, when I joined the Marine Corps,
Bragging.
I've had a security clearance for over 38 years now because I kept my nose clean. Okay, so they say, yeah, he's got a clean record. We'll give him a security clearance. And just like some of these serial killers, people say, "Oh, you're such a good guy for so many years. What happened?" Well, you're a good person until you're not. You've got a clean record until you don't. It's the same thing with the red flag laws. I mean, you can get out of the military with 20 years of exemplary service and then just go flip out, and you could be one of those people that they want to tag as eligible to be flagged.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, with regard to that, what you were mentioning, Mike, is as a matter of fact, we just had a Zoom meeting this morning. I know you were busy and couldn't join it, but the Veterans Disability in 1988, Congress passed a law under the 100th Congress that made it illegal to use veteran disability compensation for child support or alimony.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, many attorneys out there are either ignorant or they just don't care, and they say, "Oh no, it can be used. It's income." But it's not. It doesn't fall under the legal definition of income. In Title 38, Section 5301 and Title 38, Section 511 specifically state that only the Secretary of Veterans Affairs can make decisions regarding that. But
And every
single state,
every veteran and military member I know is like theirs is being used for that. In addition to
mine was.
Yeah, and if you're in the military, basic allowance for housing, basic allowance for subsistence, which are for housing and sustenance, those are being used as well.
Right, and under Title 37, those do not fall under the definition of income because they're special allowances, and they have a purpose. They're not meant to be divided. But the judges don't seem to care, and the judges tend to legislate from the bench and reach up into, federal authority and pull it down and say, I'm going to take this into, I'm going to legislate from the bench, basically. And it's happening regularly. It's leading to a lot of. Oh, can you hear me, Ron?
I think we lost Ron's audio again. Can we hear you?
Here we go again.
There we go.
Son of a gun. Good thing we're not live, right? I need to get a new USB cable for my amplifier. It's not even legislating from the bench because even if they were, these are state courts. This is always family court, or family part, or whatever they call it in your state. These are state court judges. Neither they nor the legislature of any state has the ability to touch money that is in a sort of trust pursuant to federal law. It's simply illegal. Now the fact is, and what they're doing though, right, is they're garnishing it. In other words, they're saying that this money, instead of being paid into your bank account, is going to be paid into her bank account.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And listen, I'm glad to say there are two things I've managed to avoid. I've managed to avoid getting divorced and being involved as a lawyer in divorces. That's right. But I obviously know a lot of people who have had the misfortune of being involved in both or either. And family law in this country is a train wreck. Mm-hmm. It's a train wreck. And certainly if you're a man, you're the guy getting hit by that train. I mean,
mm-hmm. And if there's any swamp in this country that needs to be drained, it's the family court system. It really is. I mean, that's where it all starts.
Well, I think the court system in general does need some reform, especially that area of the court, because when it applies to military and veterans, we are not treated the same way. We have to follow orders. We get sent places where, and this has been a problem with the global war on terror, is people have been sent away from their children, and then these judges, they're abandoned and all this stuff, and they change custody orders, then they come back, and now they've lost custody of the children.
Wow,
and
really?
It leads to parental alienation.
Wow,
exactly.
That's crazy. That's unbelievable. I'll tell you, my dad was in the U.S. Army. He was a reserve, and he was called up during the Berlin crisis. And after he solved the Berlin crisis with the help of President Kennedy, he was, deactivated and came back to his job in civilian life, working for an airline in New York, and they had hired someone else to take over for him, which is against the law.
Hmm.
But of course, they needed it to get the work to get done. But rather than fire him, they just said, "Okay, Jerry, we moved your desk to over here," and his desk was inside a closet. You know, it's always been this problem that
Supreme Court
veterans,
just did a case last session on this.
and so imagine, that was 1962,
Mhm.
right? And in 2022, that because these problems aren't going to go away. I mean, on the one hand, we have these really elevated values which say, "Thou shalt not." Again, you're not going to do this to a veteran. These people are putting everything on the line for your country. And then you have the people who have to pay for that, and they need to figure out ways to do it. At least I guess in those days, there was an expectation that pre-Vietnam, somebody was in the service, you gave a certain amount of respect. I
Mhm.
mean, these days, you guys tell me. I don't think that's nearly the same as it was.
Honestly, for the bulk of this country's history, when you start looking at things of the Red Army, of the veterans, or the bonus army, we
Right,
actually
right.
don't have the best track record of taking care of our veterans. Uh, it's very much a recent thing where people want to do well by the veterans, and I think a lot of that has to do with backlash from Vietnam. But I, I do want to get your opinion. I know we're going to get caught on time, so I want to get your opinion on this next one, and this is a little bit more political. The Alex Jones trial. Um, I'm sure you've heard about it and about the very large judgment out of Connecticut. Uh, will this be a civil rights case? Do you see this going any further, or do you see this just?
Oh, it's going to go definitely go. It's going to definitely go further, and I think it's going to be overturned. This is not a defamation case. They found Alex Jones liable for being an asshole. And listen, there are a lot of assholes out there that I wish people that they would get that you could drag them into court for that. But being there's a very long tradition of people being that, and they don't usually get sued for it because there is no real cause of action. It's defamation. Why? Because he called them actors. How did that harm them? How did that affect them? So then you find, a little hook to hang on that supposed defamation, and then you're going to impose a $965 million judgment, which, as I understand briefly from something I saw in Connecticut law, doesn't even sustain that. And in fact, the trial judge will have to do what we call remittiture, or basically throw out that part of the judgment. But the liability claim in and of itself, I'm not supporting what he said. He really was an a-hole. I mean, it was irresponsible, and
Mhm.
I get it that he likes. I don't, did he really believe that? I find that hard to believe. He's because, I've never met Alex. I've never been on the show. I watched it once when one of my clients was on. That was Gavin McInnes, and I never saw Gavin McInnes.
I love Gavin.
I never saw Gavin in a situation where I just saw him shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink I mean, that's how powerful of a personality and a maverick. What a maverick Alex Jones is. So yeah, that was his shtick, and he overshot the mark. He overshot the mark, and he should get spanked, and he should get all kinds of canceled. I get that, but when I think of the things that the courts will not find somebody liable for, the juries will not. Parkville shooter.
Yeah.
That's the guy that they decided, but no death penalty for him. He shot 17 babies in school. No death penalty for that in a state where you have a death penalty? Come on.
This kind of goes back to it's almost like how the Supreme Court said the right to tax is pretty much the right to destroy,
The
and
power to tax. The power
or
to tax. The
power to
power to tax.
tax. Yeah. And this is kind of like the same way. Can the courts institute a judgment like that? Is going to be the question. Because I mean, you can essentially destroy someone's livelihood and they not be able to make any income. Um, Don, have you been watching this at all?
Which one? Which case is that?
Either one. What?
Oh,
Both were on my list.
I heard the judgment from the Alex Jones trial yesterday. I heard that it was like close to $1 billion or something like that.
And the Parkville case where the jury,
Parkland in Florida.
yeah, where they shot all those kids.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't heard anything on that recently.
So the Supreme Court decided. Actually, my understanding.
The jury, by a vote of 11-1, didn't vote for the death penalty. They just went for life in prison.
Life in prison. 17 murders of children. And, of course his lawyers are going to find stuff. Yeah, he's had emotional problems and his mother took... I'm not saying that there's no place for mercy, but that place is nowhere near the number 17. I mean, if he's not mentally ill such that he's unable, if he was not found to be unable to understand what he was doing, and of course he understood what he was doing. Of course he understood what he was doing. Ah, come on. This country's screwed up.
Absolutely took a very conscious act to do what he did. We are starting to come up against our time, so before we run out of time, I would like you both to be able to plug wherever people can find you, what you'd like people to know, if you're selling anything.
The best place to find me is on Twitter at Ron Coleman, like it says. There you'll find me talking about all the stuff I'm doing, like my podcast, Coleman Nation Podcast, which we've just rebranded, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. And otherwise, I try to get some work done. I'm a lawyer.
Don, you where can people find you or support what you're doing?
Well, I'm doing a couple things. I'm trying to get into voice acting. I have a website out there. However, it's kind of tough in Hollywood because I will turn down any type of work with anything woke. I won't even accept. I don't care how much they pay me. I won't do it. So it is, and I worked in Hollywood back in the 80s, and it is kind of tough, but I don't care. I go out my morals and my principles, and I'm not going to compromise those. But
good for you.
You can find me if anybody wants to use my voice. DonWenger.com.
Is your reel uploaded there?
It is.
Okay, everyone go check it out. Find a reason to need Don on a commercial.
And I'd like to, for any of the other veterans or attorneys watching, there's only one attorney in this country that's fighting for the veteran disability, and that's Attorney Carson Tucker. He's basically...
So unfortunately, Don got cut off right there, but he did record for me what he was trying to say, and I'm going to play that for you all right now.
So Carson Tucker is basically the only attorney in the country that's taking on the states that are abusing veterans and illegally using their VA disability compensations to calculate child support and alimony. Carson has two websites. One is Lex4E PLLC, that's LEXFORIPLLC.com. The second one is TrinityAdvocates.com. That's pretty self-explanatory. And another gentleman who is not an attorney but has been researching this for the last 3 decades, he is Bob Terrian. Bob has a website called veteranhope.org. You can go to his website and find a lot of information regarding the illegal use of VA disability compensation.
You can really tell that Don right there does a lot of voiceover work. Yeah. So yeah, if you're looking for any type of work like that, definitely reach out to Don at donwenger.com. I do want to thank my guest, Ron Coleman, for joining us, taking time out of his very busy day. He's a great guest. I hope he does come back and talk with us some more, because being able to talk with a legal mind like him is absolutely fascinating. So everyone out there, thank you for joining on this very special edition of Veteran Nation. And as always, thank you for being worth serving.